I'm standing in front of 200 people at the Riverside Community Center, my hands shaking as I hold the microphone, about to destroy the woman who spent 4 years stealing my life. Rebecca Hartwell sits in the front row, her face frozen in that practiced smile she always wore, completely unaware that I've brought copies of every forged document, every manipulated session recording, every lie she told to turn my family against me while she drained my inheritance down to nothing. 4 years ago I walked into Dr. Hartwell's office because I couldn't sleep. My mother had just died 3 months earlier, and I was drowning in grief. The inheritance she left me was substantial, over $2 million, but I didn't care about money. I cared about the fact that my mom was gone, that I'd never hear her voice again, that I'd lost the one person who truly understood me. My older sister Emma had always been distant, and my younger brother Michael had his own family to worry about. I felt completely alone in the world, and that's when I saw Dr. Hartwell's advertisement in the local paper. Specialized in grief counseling. 20 years of experience. Called that same day. The first session felt like coming up for air after drowning. Hartwell listened to me cry for 45 minutes straight without interrupting once. She had this way of tilting her head slightly to the left when I spoke. Her eyes soft and understanding, and she took notes in a leather-bound journal with this expensive-looking pen. Her office smelled like lavender and vanilla, with cream-colored walls and these heavy curtains that blocked out all the noise from the street below. I remember thinking that this place felt safe, that maybe I could finally start healing here. She scheduled me for twice-weekly sessions, and I agreed without hesitation. I would have agreed to anything that promised to make the pain stop. By the third session, Dr. Hartwell started asking questions about my family. How was my relationship with Emma? Did Michael check in on me after Mom died? Were they supportive during the funeral arrangements? I told her the truth, that Emma had been cold and businesslike, focused on dividing up Mom's belongings efficiently rather than grieving together. Michael had flown in for 2 days and then went back to Colorado, barely answering my calls after that. Hartwell wrote everything down, nodding slowly, and then she said something that changed everything. She said, "Sometimes the people closest to us cause the deepest wounds, Sarah. Sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up for you." Those words burrowed into my brain like parasites. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Hartwell started pointing out patterns I'd never noticed before. The way Emma always criticized my choices. How Michael only called when he needed something. The fact that neither of them had really been there for me when Mom got sick, when I was the one sitting in hospital rooms and making impossible decisions about treatment options. Hartwell made me see that I'd been carrying my family emotionally for years, and they'd never once carried me back. She started giving me homework assignments. Writing exercises where I documented every time Emma made me feel small, every instance where Michael's selfishness hurt me. I filled 3 notebooks in 2 months. The sessions increased to 3 times a week. Hartwell said I was making breakthrough progress, but I needed intensive support during this crucial healing phase. I didn't question it. I trusted her completely. She was the only person who seemed to understand the depth of my pain, the complexity of my family dynamics. She started recommending that I create distance from Emma and Michael. Not permanently, she said, just until I was strong enough to set healthy boundaries. She helped me craft text messages that were polite but firm, explaining that I needed space to focus on my mental health. Emma responded with concern, asking if I was okay if she'd done something wrong. Hartwell and I worked on a response together during our next session. I told Emma that her constant judgment had taken a toll on me, that I needed time to heal without her negativity. Emma's response was hurt and confused, but Dr. Hartwell praised me for standing up for myself. Michael tried calling multiple times, but Dr. Hartwell suggested I let it go to voicemail. She said his attempts to reach out were likely motivated by guilt rather than genuine care, and engaging with him before I was ready would set back my progress. I listened to his voicemails late at night. His voice worried and asking what was going on, but I never called back. Hartwell told me that the anxiety I felt about cutting off contact was my old patterns trying to reassert themselves, the unhealthy need to please everyone even at my own expense. She said I was doing the hard work of breaking those patterns, and I should be proud of myself. 6 months into therapy, Dr. Hartwell started talking about my financial situation. She asked if managing Mom's inheritance was causing me stress. I admitted that it was overwhelming, that I didn't know anything about investments or estate planning, that I was terrified of making wrong decisions with money that represented my mother's entire life's work. Hartwell told me she had connections with financial advisors who specialized in helping therapy clients manage sudden wealth during emotional transitions. She said it was common for people in my situation to make impulsive financial decisions they'd later regret, and having professional guidance could protect me from myself. She gave me the business card of Preston and Associates Financial Management. I called them the next day. The financial advisor's name was Richard Preston. He had silver hair and wore expensive suits, and he met with me in Dr. Hartwell's office for our first consultation, which should have been a red flag but wasn't because Dr. Hartwell explained that coordinating care between mental health and financial health was standard practice for high-net-worth clients. Richard reviewed my accounts and told me that my money was sitting stagnant, losing value to inflation. He recommended moving everything into a special trust that would maximize returns while protecting the principal. The paperwork was dense and full of legal language I didn't understand, but both Richard and Dr. Hartwell walked me through it, and I signed where they told me to sign. I transferred everything. $2.3 million. The first year of therapy flew by in a blur of sessions and homework assignments and increasingly isolated days. I'd stopped responding to Emma's emails. Michael had given up trying to call. I quit my job as a marketing coordinator because Dr. Hartwell said the stress was impeding my healing, and with my inheritance secured, I didn't need to work anyway. My days consisted of therapy sessions, journaling, and sitting in my apartment watching television or reading self-help books that Dr. Hartwell recommended. I told myself I was healing. I told myself that this isolation was temporary, that once I was stronger, I'd reconnect with the world. But I wasn't getting stronger. I was getting smaller, more dependent on Dr. Hartwell's approval, more convinced that she was the only person who truly cared about my well-being. Hartwell started scheduling emergency sessions. She'd call me at midnight saying she'd been thinking about something I said during our last appointment, something that worried her, and could I come in first thing in the morning? I always said yes. Sometimes she'd have me come in on Sundays. She said traditional therapy boundaries didn't apply to us because our work together was so deep and transformative that I was her most committed patient, and she wanted to give me the attention I deserved. Felt special. Looking back, I can't believe how blind I was, but when you're drowning and someone throws you a rope, you don't question whether they're slowly pulling you deeper underwater. By year 2, I was seeing Dr. Hartwell 5 times a week. The trust Richard had set up was generating statements that I barely looked at. Numbers and percentages that meant nothing to me. Whenever I asked about withdrawing money for living expenses, Richard would process the transfer quickly. No questions asked. I was spending about $6,000 a month on therapy sessions alone, plus the apartment rent, plus food and utilities. Seemed like a lot, but Dr. Hartwell reminded me that mental health was an investment in myself, that I couldn't put a price on healing, that people spent more on cars and vacations than I was spending on saving my own life. She wasn't wrong exactly. I was alive technically, but I wasn't living. Emma showed up at my apartment one day during year 2. I'd forgotten that she had a spare key from when she'd helped me move in years earlier. She let herself in and found me in my bathrobe at 3 in the afternoon, the curtains drawn, surrounded by journals and therapy worksheets. She looked horrified. She asked me what was happening, why I'd cut everyone out, whether I was eating, whether I was okay. I told her that I was finally putting myself first, that I was doing the work she'd never been brave enough to do, and that she needed to leave. The words came out harsh and cold, exactly the way Dr. Hartwell and I had practiced for a situation like this. Emma's face crumpled, and she said that Mom would be heartbroken to see what I'd become. That cut deep, but I forced myself to stay strong. I told her to leave and not come back. She left crying and I immediately called Dr. Hartwell for an emergency session. Hartwell praised me for maintaining my boundaries and said Emma's attempt to manipulate me with guilt about Mom proved that we'd been right about her toxicity all along. Year 3 was when cracks started appearing in the perfect image I had of Dr. Hartwell, tiny fractures I tried to ignore. I'd mentioned during a session that I was thinking about adopting a cat, something to keep me company, and Dr. Hartwell spent 40 minutes explaining why that was a bad idea, how I was trying to fill an emotional void with a pet, how it was avoidance behavior. I left that session feeling confused because getting a cat seemed like a normal, healthy thing to do, but I trusted Dr. Hartwell's expertise over my own instincts. I didn't get the cat. A few weeks later, I ran into an old friend from college at the grocery store, the first time I'd left my apartment in days. She was excited to see me, asked if I wanted to grab coffee and catch up. I said yes before thinking about it, and we exchanged numbers. When I told Dr. Hartwell about it during our next session, her face did something strange, something tight and controlled, before smoothing back into her usual expression. She said that reconnecting with people from my past before I'd fully healed could trigger regression, that I should cancel the coffee date and focus on my current work. Cancelled. The financial statements from the trust started showing smaller numbers. In year 1, the balance had been around $2.5 million after some gains. By year 3, it was down to $1.8 million. I asked Richard about it during one of our quarterly reviews, and he explained that there had been some market volatility, some necessary repositioning of assets, some management fees that were standard for this type of account. Sounded reasonable. Hartwell said that worrying about money was a distraction from my emotional work, and that Richard was a professional who had my best interests at heart. I let it go. I had bigger things to worry about, like the fact that I'd started having panic attacks whenever I thought about leaving my apartment, or that I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt genuinely happy, or that my entire life had narrowed down to the space between therapy sessions. Everything shattered on a random Tuesday in October of year 4. I was sitting in Dr. Hartwell's waiting room, early for my afternoon appointment, when another patient came out of her office. The woman was probably in her 60s, well-dressed, and she walked past me without making eye contact. But as she reached the door, she dropped her wallet. I picked it up and called out to her, and when she turned back, I saw that her eyes were red from crying. She thanked me and took the wallet, and as she did, she said something that made my blood run cold. She said, 4 years with Rebecca, and I'm finally realizing she's been lying to me about my daughter. Be careful. Then she left before I could ask what she meant. I sat in that waiting room with my heart pounding, those words echoing in my head. Be careful. Lying about her daughter. For years. The same amount of time I'd been seeing Dr. Hartwell. When she called me into her office, I was shaking. I sat down in my usual chair and tried to focus on the session, but I couldn't stop thinking about what the woman had said. Hartwell noticed my distraction and asked what was wrong. I lied and said I was fine, just tired. She looked at me with those soft, understanding eyes and said that lying to your therapist was the same as lying to yourself, that we'd built a foundation of trust over these years, and I shouldn't damage it now. The irony of those words, coming from her mouth, knowing what I know now. That night, I did something I hadn't done in almost 4 years. Called Emma. She answered on the first ring, her voice cautious and surprised. I asked her if she was free to meet for coffee, and there was a long silence before she said yes. We met the next morning at a cafe halfway between our apartments. Emma looked older, more tired, and when she hugged me, I realized how much I'd missed her, how much I'd missed having family. We sat down and I told her everything. The therapy, the isolation, Dr. Hartwell's advice about cutting off contact, the financial trust. Emma listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked if she could see the trust documents. I'd brought them with me, something instinctive telling me I might need them. Emma read through the papers, her face getting paler with each page. She was a contract lawyer for a pharmaceutical company, so legal documents were her specialty. When she finished reading, she looked up at me and said, "Sarah, this isn't a trust. This is theft." She explained that the document I'd signed gave Richard Preston complete control over my assets with no oversight, no requirements to report to me, and virtually no way for me to revoke his authority without his consent. She said the fees listed were astronomical, 20% of assets annually, which was unheard of in legitimate financial management. She said that if the balance had dropped from $2.3 million to $1.8 million in 3 years, and I'd only withdrawn maybe $200,000 for living expenses, then someone had stolen at least $300,000 from me. I felt like I was going to throw up. Emma kept talking, explaining that she wanted to contact Michael, that we needed to get a forensic accountant involved, that I should stop seeing Dr. Hartwell immediately. I told her about the woman in the waiting room, what she'd said about Dr. Hartwell lying to her about her daughter. Emma's face went hard, and she said that Dr. Hartwell had probably been running this same scam on multiple patients, isolating vulnerable people and stealing their money through complicit financial advisors. She said we needed to report this to the state licensing board, to the police, to anyone who would listen. But I wasn't sure. Part of me still wanted to believe that this was a misunderstanding, that Dr. Hartwell cared about me, that the last 4 years hadn't been a complete lie. Emma made me promise not to go to my next therapy session, to give her time to investigate further. I agreed, but I didn't keep the promise. I showed up at Dr. Hartwell's office the next day because I needed to hear her explain it, needed to look her in the eyes and ask if she'd been stealing from me. When I walked in, she smiled her usual smile and asked how I was feeling. I told her that I'd reconnected with Emma, that we'd reviewed the trust documents, and that I had some questions about the financial arrangement. Change in Dr. Hartwell's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The warmth in her eyes went cold, and she set down her pen very carefully before speaking. She said that Emma had always been manipulative, that this was exactly the kind of interference she'd predicted, and that I needed to cut contact again immediately or risk undoing all our progress. I pushed harder. I asked about the fees, about the balance, about why Richard Preston held so much control over my money. Hartwell's voice got sharp in a way I'd never heard before. She said that questioning her professional judgment was a sign of regression, that I was letting Emma's toxicity poison the safe space we'd built together, and that if I wasn't willing to trust her after 4 years, then maybe I wasn't as committed to healing as she'd thought. She said that some patients self-sabotage when they get close to breakthrough moments, and that's what I was doing now. She said we needed to increase our sessions to twice daily until we worked through this crisis. Something clicked in my brain right then, standing in that lavender-scented office with Dr. Hartwell staring at me with thinly veiled hostility. This wasn't therapy. This was control. This was manipulation. This woman had spent 4 years systematically isolating me from everyone who loved me, convincing me I was broken and she was the only one who could fix me, all while stealing my inheritance. The rage that flooded through me was so intense I thought I might pass out. But I didn't let it show. Instead, I took a breath and told Dr. Hartwell she was right, that I'd let Emma get in my head, that I was sorry for questioning her. I watched the coldness in her eyes thaw slightly, watched her pick up her pen and make a note in her journal. She scheduled me for a session the next morning and told me to ignore any further contact from Emma. I agreed to everything. Then I left her office and immediately called Emma. The next 3 months were a carefully orchestrated investigation. Emma brought Michael in, and he flew out from Colorado the same week. The 3 of us worked with a forensic accountant named David Chen, who specialized in financial fraud cases. David subpoenaed records from Preston and Associates and discovered that Richard Preston wasn't even a licensed financial advisor. He was Dr. Hartwell's brother-in-law, running a fake company out of a P.O. box. The trust wasn't registered with any state agency. The investments listed on my statements didn't exist. Over 4 years, Dr. Hartwell and Richard had stolen approximately $900,000 from me through fake management fees, fake investment losses, and direct transfers to accounts they controlled. David found evidence that they'd run the same scheme on at least 7 other patients, all women who'd come to Dr. Hartwell during periods of grief or trauma, all of whom had significant inheritances or settlements. But we couldn't just go to the police. David explained that financial fraud cases were notoriously difficult to prosecute because they required proving intent, and Dr. Hartwell could claim that she genuinely believed the financial arrangement was legitimate, that she'd been deceived by Richard just like I had. We needed something more concrete, something that proved Dr. Hartwell's deliberate manipulation. That's when Emma had the idea. She said we should record a therapy session where I confronted Dr. Hartwell directly, where I gave her the chance to come clean, and we documented her response. It was legal in our state to record conversations as long as one party consented, which I did. I was terrified, but I knew it was the only way. I'd continued seeing Dr. Hartwell throughout the investigation, pretending everything was normal, playing the role of the compliant patient. It was the hardest acting job of my life, sitting in that office twice a week while rage burned in my chest, smiling and nodding while she spun her lies. But I did it because I knew that every session was gathering evidence. Every manipulation she attempted was another nail in her coffin. David had us set up a sophisticated recording system, a device that looked like a regular pen but captured high-quality audio. I brought it to a session in late January, 4 years and 3 months after I'd first walked into Dr. Hartwell's office. I started the session normally, talking about my week, my feelings, my progress. Hartwell made her usual notes and asked her usual probing questions. Then, about 20 minutes in, I shifted the conversation. I said that I'd been thinking about my finances, that I wanted to understand the trust better, and that I'd appreciate if she could help me contact Richard to get more detailed information about where my money was invested. Hartwell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and she said that we'd discussed this before, that my obsession with money was a defense mechanism against doing deeper emotional work. I pressed further. I said that Emma had raised some concerns about the fee structure, and while I knew Emma was often wrong about things, maybe we could just review the documents together to put my mind at ease. That's when Dr. Hartwell made her fatal mistake. She stood up from her chair, crossed the room to where I was sitting, and sat down on the coffee table directly in front of me, her knees almost touching mine. It was a violation of the physical boundary she'd always maintained in our sessions, and it felt immediately threatening. She took both of my hands in hers, her grip tight, and she said, "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your sister is trying to destroy the progress you've made because she's jealous of your growth. The questions you're asking about money are exactly what she wants you to ask because she knows it will drive a wedge between us. Richard and I have taken care of you for 4 years, and this is how you repay that care. By letting Emma poison your mind against the people who actually love you." I asked her directly, my voice shaking, if she and Richard had stolen my money. Hartwell's face went through several expressions in rapid succession, surprise, then anger, then something that looked almost like pity. She let go of my hands and stood up, walking back to her desk. When she turned around, her expression was cold and professional. She said, "I think we need to discuss your paranoid ideation and how it relates to your underlying trust issues. This delusion that Richard and I would steal from you is a manifestation of your deepest fear, that you're unlovable and everyone eventually betrays you. We need to work through this in intensive therapy, possibly with medication support." I stood up too, pulling the recording pen from my pocket and holding it up so she could see it. I said, "I've recorded this entire session. I have financial records proving that you and Richard stole almost $1 million from me. I have evidence that you did this to at least 7 other women. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what you are." The color drained from Dr. Hartwell's face. She started to say something, then stopped. She walked to her desk, sat down, and stared at me for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "You can't prove intent. I'll say I thought the investments were legitimate. Richard will take the fall. You'll get some money back, but you'll never prove I knew what was happening. And every therapy note I've written about you over 4 years documents your instability, your paranoia, your inability to maintain relationships. Who do you think a jury will believe? Have you ever had someone look you in the eyes and confirm that they manipulated you for years, then tell you there's nothing you can do about it?" That moment broke something in me, but it also clarified everything. Hartwell was right that proving criminal intent would be nearly impossible. But there was another way to make her pay, a way that would hurt her more than any legal judgment. I would expose her publicly, in front of everyone whose opinion she valued, in a way that would destroy her reputation and her practice permanently. Emma found out that Dr. Hartwell was giving a keynote speech at the State Psychological Association's annual conference in March. The topic was ethical boundaries in therapeutic relationships, which was so grimly ironic it would have been funny if it wasn't so enraging. The conference was open to the public, with about 200 mental health professionals attending. Emma said we should crash the conference and confront Dr. Hartwell publicly, but I had a better idea. I contacted the conference organizers, told them I was a patient of Dr. Hartwell's who wanted to share a testimonial about her work, and asked if I could introduce her before her speech. They loved the idea. They thought it would add emotional depth to the presentation. The weeks leading up to the conference were consumed with preparation. David compiled all the financial evidence into a clear, damning presentation. Emma worked with our lawyer to ensure everything we were doing was legal, that we weren't opening ourselves up to defamation suits. Michael helped me write my speech, cutting out anything that sounded vengeful or emotional and focusing on facts, dates, numbers. We printed 200 copies of a packet that included the fake trust documents, bank statements showing the stolen funds, and a summary of the investigation findings. We contacted the 7 other victims David had identified, and 4 of them agreed to attend the conference and share their stories if needed. I barely slept the night before the conference. I kept imagining Dr. Hartwell's face when she realized what was happening, kept rehearsing my speech, kept second-guessing whether this was the right approach. Emma stayed at my apartment, and around 3 in the morning, she found me sitting on the kitchen floor having a panic attack. She sat down next to me and held my hand until I could breathe again. She said that Mom would be proud of me for fighting back, for protecting other people from what I'd experienced, and that no matter what happened tomorrow, I wasn't alone anymore. That helped. Not enough to stop the fear, but enough to get me through the night. The conference was held at the Riverside Community Center, a beautiful old building with high ceilings and wood-paneled walls. Emma, Michael, and I arrived an hour early. We found the tech team and gave them a USB drive with David's presentation, telling them it was visual support for Dr. Hartwell's introduction. They loaded it into the system without questions. The victims who'd agreed to attend started arriving, and we gathered in a corner of the lobby. None of us had met before, but we recognized something in each other's eyes, that particular kind of damage that comes from being systematically betrayed by someone you trusted with your most vulnerable self. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. Dr. Hartwell arrived 30 minutes before her speech, looking polished and confident in a navy suit. She was talking with conference organizers, laughing at something one of them said, completely at ease. She saw me across the lobby, and her expression froze for just a second before she composed herself. She excused herself from her conversation and walked over to where I stood with Emma and Michael. She said very quietly, "What are you doing here, Sarah?" I told her I was introducing her speech, that the organizers had invited me to share my experience as her patient. She said that wasn't appropriate, that she was going to tell the organizers there'd been a misunderstanding. But before she could walk away, one of the conference organizers approached us and thanked me effusively for agreeing to introduce Dr. Hartwell, saying it would be such a moving way to start the session. Dr. Hartwell was trapped. She couldn't refuse without causing a scene, and she probably thought she could control the narrative once she got to the podium. She gave me a tight smile and said she looked forward to hearing what I had to say. The auditorium filled up quickly. 200 mental health professionals, therapists and psychologists and social workers, all settling into their seats and chatting quietly. Dr. Hartwell sat in the front row, her posture perfect, her face calm. Emma and Michael sat in the back with the other victims and David Chen. The conference organizer introduced me, explaining that I was a former patient of Dr. Hartwell's who wanted to share my journey. I walked up to the podium, my legs shaking so badly I thought I might fall. I gripped the edges of the podium and looked out at the audience. 200 faces looking back at me expectantly. Dr. Hartwell in the front row. Her eyes locked on mine with an expression I couldn't read. I started by thanking everyone for the opportunity to speak. I said that Dr. Rebecca Hartwell had changed my life, which was true, just not in the way they expected me to mean it. I said that 4 years ago I came to her in grief, vulnerable and desperate for help, and she saw an opportunity. Then I told them everything. I told them about the systematic isolation, the increasing session frequency, the manipulation of my relationships with my family. I told them about Richard Preston and the fake trust and the $900,000 stolen over 4 years. I told them that Dr. Hartwell had done this to at least 7 other women, that she had weaponized therapy as a tool for financial exploitation. The room was completely silent. I could see people pulling out their phones, starting to record. Could see Dr. Hartwell's face going pale, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. I signaled to the tech team, and David's presentation appeared on the screen behind me. Bank statements. Trust documents with Richard Preston's forged credentials. Timeline charts showing how my balance had decreased while fake fees increased. Email correspondence between Dr. Hartwell and Richard discussing how to maximize extraction from high-value clients. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I heard gasps from the audience. I saw conference organizers standing up, looking shocked and horrified. Hartwell stood up too, and for a moment I thought she was going to run. But instead she walked to the podium where I stood. She tried to take the microphone from me, and I stepped back, keeping it out of her reach. Hartwell turned to face the audience without a microphone, her voice shaking as she tried to speak loud enough to be heard. She said that this was a disturbed former patient making false accusations, that I'd been resistant to treatment and had developed an unhealthy fixation on her, that everything I was saying was a delusion rooted in paranoid ideation. But her voice was drowned out by the murmuring of the audience, people talking to each other, people looking at the evidence on the screen. One of the conference organizers approached with a microphone and asked Dr. Hartwell directly if the documents on the screen were real. Hartwell said they were fabricated, that I'd photoshopped them or something equally ridiculous. That's when David stood up from his seat in the back and identified himself as a forensic accountant who'd verified every document shown, offering to provide originals subpoenaed directly from banks. That's when the 4 other victims stood up and identified themselves, saying Dr. Hartwell had done the same thing to them. The room erupted. People were shouting questions at Dr. Hartwell. Conference organizers were pulling her away from the podium, telling her she needed to leave immediately. Someone called the police. Hartwell was shaking her head, her perfect composure completely shattered, mascara starting to run as tears streamed down her face. She looked at me one last time before security escorted her out, and her expression was pure hatred. She said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You ungrateful bitch. I saved your life." And maybe that was true in some twisted way. Maybe without her manipulation, I would have stayed isolated and broken. But she'd also tried to destroy me, and I'd survived anyway. The aftermath was chaos. The police took statements from all of us. News crews showed up within an hour, having heard about the confrontation through social media posts from attendees. The State Psychological Association immediately suspended Dr. Hartwell's license pending investigation. The local news ran the story that night, and it went viral by morning. Within a week, 9 more victims had come forward. The district attorney filed criminal charges against both Dr. Hartwell and Richard Preston for fraud, theft, and conspiracy. The trial took 18 months, and both of them were convicted. Hartwell got 12 years in prison. Richard got 15. I got back about 60% of what they stole from me, roughly $540,000, after legal fees and the forensic accounting costs. The rest was gone, spent or hidden in accounts we couldn't trace. But the money wasn't really the point anymore. The point was that Dr. Hartwell's practice was shut down, her license permanently revoked, her reputation destroyed so thoroughly that she'd never be able to manipulate another vulnerable person again. The point was that the other victims and I had testified at her trial, standing up one by one to describe what she'd done to us, watching her sit at the defendant's table and realize that all her lies and manipulations couldn't save her. The point was that Emma and Michael and I had rebuilt our relationship, slowly and carefully, relearning how to be family. It's been 2 years since the conference. I'm in therapy again, with a different therapist this time, a woman named Dr. Patricia Nguyen, who comes highly recommended, and whose credentials I verified extensively before our first session. I still have bad days where I question every relationship in my life, wondering if people actually care about me or if they're manipulating me for something. I still have nightmares about sitting in Dr. Hartwell's lavender-scented office, watching her write in her leather journal, feeling safe when I was actually being destroyed. But I also have good days, more and more of them. Days where I can trust my own judgment. Days where I can accept love from my family without suspicion. Days where I feel like myself again, whoever that is. Emma and I have coffee every Sunday morning now. Michael visits every few months, and we're planning a trip together next spring, something we haven't done since we were kids. I got a job again, working remotely for a small marketing firm, and it feels good to use my brain for something other than analyzing my own dysfunction. I adopted 2 cats despite what Dr. Hartwell said about avoidance behavior, and they're perfect. I'm dating someone, a guy named James who I met through mutual friends, and I told him everything about Dr. Hartwell on our 3rd date because I needed to know if it would scare him away. Didn't. He said everyone has damage, and at least I was honest about mine. The thing nobody tells you about revenge is that it doesn't actually heal you. Standing at that podium, destroying Dr. Hartwell's life in front of 200 people, it felt powerful and necessary and right. But it didn't undo 4 years of manipulation. It didn't give me back the relationship with my mom that I could have had in those final months if I hadn't been so consumed by grief and therapy. It didn't erase the isolation or the self-doubt or the damage to my sense of reality. Revenge is satisfying, but it's not the same as healing. Healing is slower and harder and less dramatic. Healing is coffee with your sister and therapy with someone you trust and learning to believe in yourself again despite everything that happened. But I don't regret what I did. Hartwell needed to be stopped, and public humiliation was the only weapon I had that she couldn't defend against. She'd anticipated legal action, had probably planned for it, but she hadn't anticipated being exposed in front of her peers at the moment of her professional triumph. She hadn't anticipated that her victims would find each other and stand together. She hadn't anticipated that someone she'd worked so hard to break would put themselves back together and come for her. Sometimes I think about her in prison. I wonder if she's learned anything, if she feels remorse, if she understands the depth of what she did to us. Probably not. People like Dr. Hartwell don't think they're wrong. They think they're smarter than everyone else, entitled to take what they want from people they view as weak. She probably still believes she did nothing wrong, that we were all just unstable patients who turned on her. That's the scariest part, actually. Not that she was a monster who knew she was doing evil things, but that she genuinely believed she was helping us while she robbed us blind. I wrote her a letter once, about 6 months after she was sentenced. I never sent it. In the letter, I told her that I understood why she'd chosen me as a victim. I was vulnerable and alone and desperate for someone to tell me I wasn't broken beyond repair. I told her that the worst part wasn't the money she stole, although that was devastating. The worst part was that she'd taken my grief, this raw and sacred thing, and she'd weaponized it against me. She'd made me believe that the love I felt for my mother was a weakness, that my family's imperfect attempts to support me were attacks, that isolation was healing. She'd colonized my mind so thoroughly that I'd questioned my own perception of reality. I told her that I hoped prison gave her time to think about all the lives she'd damaged, all the trust she'd destroyed, all the years of therapy that her victims would need to undo what she'd done to them. Then I burned the letter in my kitchen sink and watched the ashes swirl down the drain. She didn't deserve my words, even the angry ones. The other victims and I formed a support group. We meet monthly at a community center. Just the 9 of us who came forward during the trial. We don't talk about Dr. Hartwell much anymore. Instead, we talk about our lives, our progress, our struggles with trust and intimacy and self-worth. We celebrate each other's victories, the new jobs and repaired relationships and moments of genuine happiness. We're all at different stages of healing. Martha, who was Dr. Hartwell's patient for 6 years, still lives alone and rarely leaves her house except for our meetings. Jennifer got married last year to someone she met through online dating, and she cried through the entire ceremony because she'd never thought she'd be able to trust someone enough to marry them. Robert, the only man in our group, reconnected with his estranged son and is trying to rebuild that relationship after 5 years of Dr. Hartwell telling him his son was toxic and manipulative. We're all broken in our own ways, but we're also survivors. That word felt hollow at first, like something people say to make victims feel better about being victims. But the more time passes, the more I understand what it means. Surviving isn't just about living through something terrible. It's about choosing every single day to keep living despite what happened. It's about refusing to let the person who hurt you define who you become. Dr. Hartwell wanted me isolated and dependent and convinced of my own unworthiness. Every time I have coffee with Emma, every time I show up for therapy with Dr. Gwyn, every time I let James get close to me despite my fear, I'm proving that she failed. I'm surviving her. The media attention was overwhelming at first. 4 months after the trial, I couldn't go anywhere without someone recognizing me from the news coverage. People would approach me in grocery stores or coffee shops, wanting to tell me their own stories of manipulation or betrayal, wanting advice on how to spot a predator, wanting to thank me for being brave. I appreciated their intentions, but it was exhausting. I hadn't exposed Dr. Hartwell to become a public figure or a spokesperson for therapy abuse victims. I'd done it because I was angry and I wanted her to pay for what she'd done, and the fact that it resonated with so many people was both validating and overwhelming. Eventually, the media moved on to other stories, and I got to fade back into relative anonymity. I'm grateful for that. Emma and I talk about Mom now in ways we never could before Dr. Hartwell. We share memories, the good ones and the complicated ones, and we don't try to make her into a saint just because she's gone. Mom was flawed and difficult and sometimes critical, but she loved us fiercely in her own way. Emma tells me stories about times when Mom defended her at school or stayed up all night helping her with projects. I tell Emma about the last conversation I had with Mom before she died, how she'd held my hand and told me she was proud of me, how I'd been too paralyzed by anticipatory grief to really hear her. We cry together sometimes, processing the loss we should have processed together 4 years ago if Dr. Hartwell hadn't convinced me that grieving with family was weak. It's painful, but it's also healing in a way that 4 years of therapy with Dr. Hartwell never was. Real healing, not the fake kind that involves cutting off everyone who loves you and paying $6,000 a month for the privilege. Michael brings his kids to visit now, 2 boys aged 7 and 9 who call me Aunt Sarah and tackle me with hugs when they see me. I'd missed years of their lives, years of birthdays and holidays and school plays, because Dr. Hartwell had convinced me that Michael's family was a source of stress rather than joy. The first time I met his youngest son, I cried, because he'd been born during my 2nd year of therapy with Dr. Hartwell, and I hadn't even known he existed until after everything fell apart. Michael had stopped telling me about his life because I never responded, never showed interest, and he'd thought I didn't care. The truth was that I'd cared desperately but had been too consumed by Dr. Hartwell's manipulation to reach out. We talk about it now, Michael and I, the years we lost. He's forgiven me, even though I still haven't fully forgiven myself. Dating James has been terrifying in ways I didn't anticipate. Not because he's done anything wrong, but because trusting someone with emotional intimacy feels like standing on the edge of a cliff. Every time he asks about my day or my feelings or my past, I have to fight the urge to analyze his motivations, to look for hidden manipulation, to protect myself by pushing him away. Dr. Gwyn says this is normal, that hypervigilance after betrayal trauma is a survival mechanism, but it's exhausting. James is patient with me in ways I don't deserve. When I have panic attacks about whether he's lying to me, he doesn't get defensive or angry. He just sits with me and waits for it to pass, and then we talk about it. He suggested couples therapy, which terrifies me for obvious reasons, but maybe we'll try it eventually. Maybe I'll get to a place where the idea of therapy doesn't make my skin crawl. I think about the woman in Dr. Hartwell's waiting room sometimes, the one who dropped her wallet and warned me to be careful. I never got her name, never saw her again, and I don't know if she was one of the 9 victims who eventually came forward or if she'd already cut ties with Dr. Hartwell before the investigation started. But those words she spoke, "Be careful," they saved me. If she hadn't planted that seed of doubt, I might have continued in therapy for years more, might have lost everything, might have ended up so isolated and dependent that I couldn't find my way back. Sometimes I wish I could find her and thank her, tell her that her warning changed everything. But maybe she knows. Maybe she saw the news coverage and recognized me and felt satisfied that she'd helped someone escape the same trap she'd been caught in. The hardest part of all of this, harder than the financial loss or the public confrontation or the legal battles, has been accepting my own responsibility in what happened. Hartwell was the predator, absolutely, and she deserves every year of her prison sentence. But I was also an adult who made choices, who ignored red flags, who cut off people who loved me because it was easier to believe one person's lies than to face complex truths. I signed documents without reading them carefully. I stopped trusting my own instincts. I let fear and grief turn me into someone I didn't recognize. Gwyn says I shouldn't blame myself, that manipulation works precisely because it exploits our vulnerabilities, but I can't help wondering how things would have been different if I'd been stronger or smarter or more aware. That wondering keeps me up at night sometimes. The money I recovered, the $540,000, sits in a regular savings account at a different bank. I haven't touched it except for living expenses. The idea of investing it or putting it in any kind of trust makes me physically ill. Emma keeps telling me I need to do something with it, that inflation is eating away at the value, but I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That money represents my mother's life's work and Dr. Hartwell's betrayal, and I don't know how to separate those two things. Sometimes I think about donating all of it to organizations that help abuse victims, turning something painful into something useful. Other times I think about using it to start over somewhere new, leaving behind the city where all of this happened and building a life that isn't haunted by Dr. Hartwell's ghost. I haven't decided. Maybe I don't have to decide right now. There are moments when I miss her. Not the real Dr. Hartwell, the predator and thief, but the version of her I believed in for 4 years. The woman who listened without judgment, who made me feel understood, who seemed to care about my well-being more than anyone else in my life. That woman never existed, but the comfort I felt in her presence was real, and sometimes I grieve that loss as much as I grieve my mother or the lost years with my family. Gwyn says this is normal too, that victims often miss their abusers because the manipulation created genuine feelings of attachment and safety. She says it doesn't mean I'm weak or stupid or that I deserved what happened. She says it just means I'm human. I'm trying to believe her. The trial was brutal in ways I hadn't prepared for. Hartwell's lawyer tried to paint all of us victims as mentally unstable, pointing to our therapy records as evidence that we couldn't be trusted to accurately report what had happened. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about false memories and suggestibility, and how grief can distort perception. They tried to argue that Dr. Hartwell had genuinely believed the financial arrangements were legitimate, that Richard had deceived her just as he'd deceived us. The prosecutor tore apart those arguments with the email evidence showing Dr. Hartwell and Richard discussing their scheme explicitly, but it was still humiliating to sit in that courtroom and have my sanity questioned, my memories dismissed, my pain minimized. When the guilty verdict came through, I felt relief but not happiness. Justice and healing aren't the same thing. I've started writing about my experience, not for publication but just for myself. Page after page of memories and analysis and attempts to understand how I ended up in Dr. Hartwell's office that first day and how I finally escaped 4 years later. Writing helps me process things that therapy alone can't touch, helps me see patterns I missed while living through it. I've filled 7 notebooks so far, and I'm nowhere near done. Maybe someday I'll turn it into something others can read, a warning or a guide or just a story of survival. Or maybe I'll keep it private, these pages just for me, A map of where I've been and how far I've traveled from that broken person who trusted the wrong therapist at the wrong time. Emma asked me recently if I regret calling Dr. Hartwell that first day, if I wish I'd chosen a different therapist or dealt with Mom's death on my own. I told her the truth, which is that I don't know. If I hadn't called Dr. Hartwell, I wouldn't have lost 4 years and $900,000 and my relationship with my family. But I also wouldn't have learned how strong I am, how resilient, how capable of surviving betrayal and finding my way back to myself. I wouldn't have reconnected with Emma and Michael in the deep way we have now. I wouldn't have met the other victims and formed relationships with people who understand this particular kind of damage. Maybe everything happens for a reason. Or maybe sometimes terrible things just happen and we find meaning in them anyway because the alternative is believing we suffered for nothing. The question that haunts me most is whether I could have seen it coming, whether there were signs in that first session that should have warned me Dr. Hartwell was dangerous. I've replayed that day 1,000 times in my mind. The lavender-scented office, the leather journal, the way she tilted her head when I spoke. Was there something sinister in her attention? Or was it only sinister in retrospect? Gwyn says predators are skilled at seeming trustworthy, that their ability to manipulate depends on their victims not seeing them clearly until it's too late. She says I couldn't have known, that I was doing the best I could with the information I had. But I still wonder. I still wish I'd trusted my gut on things like the financial trust or the isolation from my family. Maybe the signs were there and I just chose not to see them because I was too desperate for someone to fix me. 2 years after the conference, I'm still putting my life back together. Some days it feels impossible, like I'm trying to assemble a puzzle when half the pieces are missing or damaged beyond recognition. Other days it feels manageable, like I'm making real progress toward becoming someone whole and functional and capable of happiness. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I'm not the person I was before my mother died. And I'm not the person Dr. Hartwell tried to turn me into. I'm someone new, someone still being formed, someone defined as much by survival as by the wounds that made survival necessary. I don't know if I like this version of myself yet, but I'm learning to accept her. The support group is planning a memorial for the time we lost to Dr. Hartwell. Not a funeral or anything morbid, but an acknowledgement that we each lost years of our lives that we can never get back, years that should have been spent healing and growing and connecting with people we loved. We're going to gather at a park, share stories, maybe plant a tree or release balloons or do something symbolic that marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Feels important somehow, this ritual of letting go. Hartwell took enough from us. We don't need to carry her weight anymore. James told me he loves me last week. We were sitting on my couch watching a movie, something mindless and funny, and he just said it. I love you, Sarah. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to say it back because I think I do love him, or at least I'm learning what love feels like when it's not tangled up with manipulation. But another part of me panicked, wondering if this was the moment when everything would fall apart, when his mask would slip and I'd discover he'd been using me all along. I asked him for time, and he said okay without hesitation, without making me feel guilty or pressuring me to reciprocate. That's how I know he's different from Dr. Hartwell. Real love doesn't demand anything. It just exists, patient and steady, waiting for you to be ready to receive it. I visited my mother's grave for the first time since her funeral. I'd avoided it during the years with Dr. Hartwell because she'd convinced me that visiting graves was performative grief, that real healing happened internally rather than through rituals. But standing there at the headstone with Emma beside me, I realized how much I'd needed this. I told Mom everything about Dr. Hartwell and the betrayal and the trial and how I was trying to rebuild my life. I apologized for wasting the grief she left me with, for letting someone twist it into a weapon against myself. Emma read a poem she'd written about Mom, something beautiful about how love persists beyond death, and we both cried until we couldn't cry anymore. Felt right. It felt like the mourning I should have done 4 years ago. The thing about revenge is that it changes you. Before the conference, before the trial, before all of it, I believed that people were fundamentally good, that therapists were safe, that vulnerability was strength. After destroying Dr. Hartwell's life in front of 200 people, I know that people can be monsters, that authority figures can be predators, and that vulnerability without wisdom is just an invitation to be hurt. I'm not sure which version of myself I prefer, the naive, trusting one or the hardened, suspicious one. Maybe I need to find a middle ground, someone who can be open to connection while still protecting herself from harm. That's the work I'm doing with Dr. Gwyn, trying to rebuild trust in the world without becoming so guarded that I miss out on genuine love. Sometimes I fantasize about confronting Dr. Hartwell in prison, sitting across from her in a visitation room and asking her why. Why me specifically? Why theft instead of just overcharging for legitimate services? Why manipulate us into isolation when you could have just taken money and let us keep our families? Did you enjoy it, the power of controlling someone's entire reality? Did you feel anything when you watched me deteriorate over 4 years? Did you ever, for even one moment, feel guilty? But I know I'll never actually visit her. She doesn't deserve any more of my time or energy or pain. She's already taken enough. The lawsuit against the state licensing board is ongoing. We're arguing that they failed in their oversight duties, that they should have caught Dr. Hartwell's scheme earlier, that other patients might have been spared if the board had been more vigilant. The lawyers say it's a long shot, that proving negligence against a regulatory body is difficult, but we're trying anyway. Even if we lose, even if we don't get any money from it, at least we'll have pushed the system to examine its failures and hopefully prevent future Dr. Hartwells from operating unchecked for years. That matters almost as much as the personal revenge did. I got a message on social media last month from someone claiming to be Dr. Hartwell's daughter. She said her mother had never mentioned me or the other victims, that she'd only learned about the trial through news coverage, and she wanted to apologize on her mother's behalf. She said she was sorry for what I'd been through, that she was horrified by what her mother had done, and that she hoped I could find peace. I didn't respond. It wasn't her fault, and her apology, though well-intentioned, couldn't change anything. But I thought about her a lot after reading that message. Hartwell had a family, people who loved her and trusted her, and she destroyed their lives too in a different way. Her daughter would have to live forever knowing her mother was a predator and a thief. That's its own kind of punishment, I suppose. The financial anxiety hasn't gone away. Even though I have money in savings, even though I'm working again, I constantly worry about ending up broke and homeless, about someone stealing from me again, about not being able to trust my own judgment about financial decisions. I check my bank account multiple times a day, looking for unauthorized transactions or signs that someone has hacked into my accounts. Gwyn says this is hypervigilance, another trauma symptom, and she's teaching me techniques to manage the anxiety without letting it consume me. Slow progress, but it's progress. Emma and I talk about starting a non-profit organization to help other therapy abuse victims. We'd provide resources for recognizing predatory therapists, support for victims navigating the legal system, and funding for forensic accounting services since most victims can't afford the investigation costs. We've had preliminary meetings with lawyers and accountants, and the project feels real in a way that's both exciting and terrifying. Part of me wants to turn my suffering into something meaningful that helps others. Another part of me just wants to move on and forget Dr. Hartwell ever existed. Maybe I can do both. Maybe helping others is how I move on. The nightmares have decreased in frequency but not intensity. I still dream about sitting in Dr. Hartwell's office, watching her write in her journal, feeling safe until the dream shifts and I realize she's writing about how to destroy me, how to take everything I have, how to make me so dependent on her that I can't exist without her approval. I wake up sweating and disoriented, and it takes minutes to remember that I'm safe, that she's in prison, that I escaped. James has learned to recognize when I'm having nightmares, and he'll wake me gently and hold me until my heart rate returns to normal. He never asks what the dreams are about, and I'm grateful for that small mercy. I wonder if Dr. Hartwell thinks about her victims, if she lies awake at night cataloging the lives she damaged, or if she's moved on completely, already planning her next scam for when she's released in 10 years. I wonder if prison has humbled her or hardened her. I wonder if she's made friends among the other inmates, or if they've discovered what she did and ostracized her. I wonder if she still believes she was helping us, or if she's finally admitted to herself that she was a predator who got caught. These questions don't have answers, and maybe I don't actually want to know. Maybe wondering is enough. The amount of trust required for healthy relationships is staggering when you've been betrayed as thoroughly as I was. Trusting Dr. Ngwin to actually help me rather than hurt me. Trusting James when he says he loves me. Trusting Emma and Michael not to abandon me again. Trusting myself to make good decisions. Every single interaction requires an act of faith that feels impossible some days. And yet I keep trying because the alternative is dying alone, isolated and suspicious, which is exactly what Dr. Hartwell wanted for me. Refusing to let her win means forcing myself to trust even when every instinct screams at me to protect myself. It's the hardest work I've ever done. I keep thinking about the moment at the conference when Dr. Hartwell's face changed, when she realized what was happening and her composure shattered. That moment of pure fear and rage in her eyes as everything she'd built collapsed around her. It should have felt triumphant, and it did in a way, but it also felt hollow. Destroying her didn't undo what she'd done to me. It didn't give me back 4 years or $900,000, or my relationship with my mother during her final months. It just meant she'd face consequences, which is important but not healing. Healing is separate from justice, and I'm still learning that distinction. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you let them reshape your entire reality, only to discover they were using that trust to destroy you? Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and believing in human goodness? I still don't know if I made the right choices in how I handled this, whether public revenge was justice or just more damage added to the pile. What would you have done if someone stole 4 years of your life and nearly $1 million while convincing you they were helping you heal? Would you have burned their life to the ground like I did? Or would you have walked away and tried to forget? And how do you learn to trust again after someone weaponizes your vulnerability so completely that you question your own grip on reality?